The fluorescent lights in the hospital hallway flickered slightly as Rebecca walked toward room 412. It was her third week working the evening shift at St. Mary's Hospice Care, and she'd learned to recognize the quiet rooms, the ones where no laughter spilled into the corridor, the ones where the television stayed dark, the ones where families didn't gather. Room 412 was one of those. She pushed open the door gently, expecting to find the elderly man inside sleeping like most patients did at this hour. But he wasn't. He sat upright in bed, staring out the window at the city below. The lights from downtown reflected off the glass, creating little patterns that danced across his weathered face. "Mr. Chen?" Rebecca said softly, not wanting to startle him. "I'm Rebecca, one of the night nurses. Just here to check on you." The old man turned slowly, and she noticed something in his eyes. Not pain exactly, though she knew from his chart that he had plenty of that. It was something else, something that made her pause in the doorway instead of just checking his vitals and moving on to the next room. "Please come in," he said. His voice was quiet but steady. "And call me Robert. Mr. Chen makes me feel like I'm in trouble." Rebecca smiled at that. She walked over to the monitors and started her routine checks. Blood pressure, temperature, oxygen levels, all the numbers she'd write down in his chart. But she could feel him watching her, not in a creepy way, just in the way lonely people do when they're desperate for any kind of human connection. "Been looking out that window long?" she asked, trying to make conversation. "Every evening," Robert replied. "I count the windows with lights on. Try to imagine the people inside them. What they're doing. If they're happy." Something about the way he said it made Rebecca's chest tighten. She'd been a nurse for 7 years, worked with hundreds of dying patients, and she thought she'd built up some kind of armor against the sadness. But this was different. This wasn't about death. This was about loneliness, and somehow that felt worse. "That's a lot of windows to count," she said, finishing up with the monitors. "I have time," Robert said with a slight shrug. "More time than I know what to do with, actually." Rebecca should have left then. She had 12 other patients to check on, medications to distribute, and a mountain of paperwork waiting at the nurse's station. But something made her sit down in the chair beside his bed instead. "You don't get many visitors?" she asked, even though she already knew the answer. His file was painfully thin. No emergency contacts. No family listed. No notify in case of anything. Robert shook his head slowly. "No family left. Never married. Never had kids. My sister passed 5 years ago, and after that..." He trailed off, looking back at the window. "Well, you know how it is. Friends drift away. Everyone gets busy with their own lives. Before you know it, you're the old guy nobody remembers." "I'm sure people remember you," Rebecca said. But even as the words left her mouth, she knew they sounded hollow. "It's okay," Robert said, and he actually smiled a little. "I'm not looking for pity. I made my choices. Spent my whole life fixing watches, you know? Tiny little gears and springs. Needed perfect focus, perfect silence. I guess I got used to the quiet, maybe too used to it." Rebecca leaned forward, genuinely interested now. "You were a watchmaker?" "For 43 years, Robert said. And for the first time she saw a spark of something in his eyes. Pride, maybe, or just the simple pleasure of talking about something he loved. "Started as an apprentice when I was 16. Back then, people actually got their watches fixed instead of throwing them away." "That must have been incredible work," Rebecca said. "I can barely change the battery in mine." Robert chuckled, a dry sound that turned into a small cough. Rebecca reached for his water cup, but he waved her off gently. It was meditation, really. Every watch is like a little universe. Everything has to work together perfectly or the whole thing stops. One broken gear, one loose spring, and time just stops. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment. Outside, an ambulance siren wailed in the distance. The hospital hummed with its constant background noise of beeping machines and distant voices. "Can I ask you something?" Robert said finally. "Of course. Why did you sit down? Most nurses just do their checks and leave." "Not that I blame them. Everyone's busy," Rebecca thought about it. Why had she sat down? She had a million reasons not to. Her feet ached from standing all day. She had other patients waiting. Her daughter was probably texting her right now, asking when she'd be home. "I don't know," she said honestly. "I guess. You just seemed like you had more to say." Robert's eyes got a little watery, though he blinked it away quickly. "Thank you for that. Really. You have no idea what it means to just talk, to have someone listen like you actually care. I do care, Rebecca said, and she meant it. She glanced at her watch and sighed. She really did need to finish her rounds. But before she stood up, she made a decision. Listen, I'll come back tomorrow during my break. We can talk more about watches or the city lights or whatever you want. How does that sound? Robert looked at her like she'd just offered him the world. You don't have to do that. I know, Rebecca said, standing up and smoothing out her scrubs. But I want to. Besides, I've always wondered how watches actually work. Maybe you can teach me. As she walked toward the door, Robert called out softly. Rebecca? She turned back. Thank you. Not just for sitting. For seeing me, not the sick old man in the bed, just me. Rebecca smiled, feeling something crack in that armor she thought she'd built. I'll see you tomorrow, Robert. As she stepped back into the bright hallway, she didn't know it yet, but that simple conversation had just changed both their lives forever. Sometimes kindness is just sitting down when you could walk away. Sometimes it's listening when you could just hear. And sometimes it's seeing the person when everyone else just sees the patient. She had 11 more rooms to visit that night, but room 412 would be the one she'd remember. Rebecca kept her promise. The next evening, she showed up at room 412 with 2 paper cups of tea from the cafeteria. Robert's face lit up when he saw her, and she realized with a pang that he'd probably been watching the door all day, hoping she'd actually come back. I wasn't sure if you liked tea, she said, setting 1 cup on his bedside table. But the coffee here tastes like burnt rubber, so I figured this was safer. Robert laughed, a real laugh this time, not the polite chuckle from the night before. Tea is perfect. My mother was British. She always said tea fixes everything. Does it? Rebecca asked, settling into the chair. Well, it doesn't fix cancer, Robert said with surprising lightness, but it makes the conversation better. Over the next 2 weeks, those evening visits became routine. Rebecca would finish her initial rounds, grab 2 cups of tea, and spend her break in room 412. They talked about everything. Robert told her about the watches he'd repaired over the years. The grandfather clock that had been in the same family for 6 generations. The pocket watch a man brought in that his son had worn in Vietnam. The delicate lady's watch with a photograph hidden inside the case. Every watch had a story, Robert explained one evening, his hands moving as he spoke, miming the delicate work of handling tiny gears. People don't just own watches. They inherit them, receive them as gifts, buy them to celebrate moments. That watch on your wrist, when did you get it? Rebecca looked down at her simple silver watch. My ex-husband gave it to me when our daughter was born. 10 years ago. You still wear it, Robert observed. Yeah, Rebecca said quietly. I guess I do, even after the divorce. Because it's not about him anymore, Robert said. It's about the day your daughter was born, see? Every watch has a story. Rebecca found herself opening up to this dying man in ways she hadn't with anyone in years. She told him about the divorce, about raising 10-year-old Lily alone, about the constant juggling of bills and schedules and guilt, about feeling like she was failing at everything. You're not failing, Robert said firmly. You're doing what mothers have done forever. You're showing up. Every single day you show up. It doesn't always feel like enough, Rebecca admitted. The gears in a watch don't feel like enough either, Robert said. Each one is tiny, seems insignificant, but remove even one and everything stops. You're the mainspring, Rebecca. You're what keeps everything moving. The other nurses started noticing the change in Robert. He requested his meals at regular times instead of barely touching them. He asked for his curtains to be opened. He even joked with the cleaning staff. During the day shift handoff, one of the morning nurses pulled Rebecca aside. I don't know what you're doing with Mr. Chen, she said, but keep doing it. He's like a different person. Rebecca didn't know what to say to that. She wasn't doing anything special. She was just talking to him, just listening, just being present. But maybe that was everything. One rainy October evening, Rebecca arrived to find Robert looking more tired than usual. His skin had taken on a grayish tone and his breathing seemed labored. She almost suggested skipping their talk, but he motioned for her to sit. I need to tell you something, he said, about why I never married, never had a family. Rebecca leaned forward, sensing this was important. I was engaged once, Robert began. Her name was Helen. We were 23. She was a teacher, loved children, wanted a house full of them, but I was obsessed with my work. The shop was struggling, and I convinced myself that if I just worked harder, longer hours, we'd have the life she wanted. So I did. 70, 80 hours a week. Missed dinners. Missed birthdays. Missed everything that mattered. He paused, and Rebecca waited. One day she said she couldn't do it anymore. Told me I'd already chosen what I loved most, and it wasn't her. She was right. By the time I realized what I'd lost, she'd married someone else. Had 3 kids. Last I heard, she was a grandmother. "Robert, I'm so sorry," Rebecca said. "Don't be," he said, shaking his head. "I'm telling you this because I see you. Working yourself to exhaustion, feeling guilty about not being enough, and I need you to hear this from someone who learned it too late. Time isn't just something you measure with gears and springs. It's something you spend, and you can't ever get it back." Rebecca felt tears prickling her eyes. "But I have to work. I have bills and Lily's school, and I know," Robert interrupted gently. "I'm not saying quit your job. I'm saying don't make my mistake. Don't let your daughter grow up remembering a tired, stressed woman who was always somewhere else in her mind. Be present when you're with her. Even if it's just 30 minutes before bed, make those 30 minutes matter." Something shifted in Rebecca that night. She realized this man, this lonely, dying man everyone else just saw as another patient, was giving her something precious, wisdom bought with a lifetime of regret. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you," Robert countered. "You've given me something I thought I'd never have again. You've made me feel like my life mattered. Like I matter." Rebecca reached over and squeezed his hand. It felt fragile, like if she pressed too hard it might break. "You do matter, Robert. You matter to me." They sat like that for a while, holding hands, listening to the rain against the window. Outside, the city lights blurred through the water droplets, creating soft halos of gold and white. "Can I ask you something?" Robert said eventually. "Anything. Will you tell me about Lily? What she's like?" So Rebecca did. She pulled out her phone and showed him pictures. Lily at her school play dressed as a tree. Lily making a ridiculous face at the camera. Lily hugging their elderly dog. For each photo, Rebecca told a story, and Robert listened with complete attention. The way someone listens when they know they won't have many more chances to hear stories. "She has your smile," Robert said, studying a photo of Lily laughing. "And your eyes. She's lucky to have you." "I'm lucky to have her," Rebecca said. "That's what makes you a good mother," Robert replied. "Knowing you're the lucky one." When Rebecca finally left that night, walking back into the fluorescent hallway, she felt different. Lighter somehow, despite the heavy conversation. She realized that in trying to help a lonely man, she'd found something she didn't know she needed. A friend, a mentor. Someone who saw her not as a nurse or a single mother or any other label, but just as Rebecca. And Robert had found the same thing. After 78 years of mostly solitude, he'd found connection. Real connection, and that made all the difference. November came fast, bringing shorter days and colder nights. Rebecca noticed the change in Robert before his doctors did. He started sleeping through her evening visits. When he was awake, he seemed confused sometimes, forgetting what they'd talked about the day before. His hand shook more when he tried to hold the teacup. The cancer was winning. Everyone knew it. Nobody said it. Rebecca started staying later at the hospital, sometimes an hour past her shift, just sitting with Robert. Her supervisor should have said something, but she didn't. Even the hardest nurses understood. Some patients just got under your skin, and there was nothing professional about it. It was just human. One evening in mid-November, Rebecca arrived to find Robert more alert than he'd been in days. His eyes were clear, focused. She'd learned in her years of hospice work that this sometimes happened. The body gave one last surge of energy before the end. Doctors called it terminal lucidity. Rebecca just called it cruel, this brief window that made you hope when hope was pointless. "I need to tell you something important," Robert said as soon as she sat down, "and I need you to really listen." "I'm listening," Rebecca said, setting down the teacups. "In my wallet in the hospital safe, there's a business card. William Patterson. He's a lawyer. I need you to call him tomorrow. Tell him I said it's time." Rebecca's stomach dropped. "Robert, what? Please," he interrupted. "Just promise me you'll call. He's expecting to hear from you." "Okay," Rebecca said slowly. "I promise. But you're scaring me a little." Robert smiled, but it looked tired. "Don't be scared. I'm just preparing things, making sure everything is handled properly. You'll understand soon." He changed the subject then, asking about Lily, asking about Rebecca's week. But she couldn't shake the feeling that something significant had just happened, even if she didn't understand what. The next morning, during her break, Rebecca called the number on the business card. A receptionist answered, professional and crisp. Patterson and Associates. Hi, my name is Rebecca Torres. I was asked to call by Robert Chen. He's a patient at Ms. Torres, yes, the receptionist interrupted, suddenly warmer. Mr. Patterson has been expecting your call. Please hold. Before Rebecca could process that, a man's voice came on the line. Ms. Torres, thank you for calling. I'm William Patterson. I've been Robert's attorney for over 30 years. He asked me to call, Rebecca said, still confused. He said to tell you it's time. Yes, William said. Ms. Torres, I need to meet with you. Not over the phone. Would you be available today? I can come to the hospital. Yes? I have my lunch break at 1. Perfect. I'll see you in the cafeteria at 1 o'clock. I'll be wearing a blue tie. He hung up before Rebecca could ask any questions. The rest of the morning dragged. Rebecca went through her rounds mechanically, her mind spinning with possibilities. Had Robert done something wrong? Was she in trouble somehow? But that didn't make sense. Nothing about this made sense. At exactly 1 o'clock, a man in his 60s approached her table in the cafeteria. Blue tie, gray suit, kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. Ms. Torres? That's me, Rebecca said, standing awkwardly. Please sit, William said, settling across from her with a leather folder. I'll get straight to it because I know you don't have much time. Robert Chen is dying. You know that. Rebecca nodded, her throat tight. Robert has no living family, no children, no siblings. His estate, while not enormous, is substantial. He owns his apartment outright. He has savings, investments, and a collection of vintage watches worth considerable money. The total assets are approximately $330,000. Rebecca's head spun. She had no idea why this lawyer was telling her this. William opened the folder and pulled out documents. 3 weeks ago, Robert changed his will. He's leaving everything to you and your daughter. Specifically, he's setting up a trust for your daughter's education, every penny of it. The cafeteria noise faded to white static. Rebecca stared at the papers, but the words swam. What? No, that's... I can't, I was just being nice to him. I was just being human, William finished. That's exactly what he told me. He said she saw me, not the dying patient. Not the lonely old man, just me. She gave me something priceless, and I want to give her daughter something priceless in return. Tears spilled down Rebecca's cheeks before she could stop them. I can't accept this. It's too much. I didn't do anything to deserve. With respect, Ms. Torres, that's not your decision, William said gently. It's Robert's, and he's made it very clearly. He has no one else, no other family. This money would go to the state if not to you. Is that what you want? For his final act of kindness to be rejected? Rebecca wiped her eyes with a napkin. Her hands were shaking. Does he know I know? Did you tell him? He asked me to tell you now, while he's still lucid enough to talk about it. He wants to discuss it with you if you're willing. Rebecca nodded numbly. $330,000. She did quick math in her head. That was 4 years of her salary. That was Lily's entire college education paid for. That was the constant weight of financial stress just gone. There's one condition, William added. Of course there was. Rebecca braced herself. He wants you to keep one of the watches, whichever one you want, for yourself not to sell. He said every watch needs someone to care about its story. Rebecca laughed through her tears. That's very Robert. He's a good man, William said. Spent too much of his life alone, but a good man nonetheless. You gave him something wonderful at the end. He wants to give you something wonderful for the beginning, for your daughter's beginning. After William left, Rebecca sat in the empty cafeteria for a long time. She thought about her daughter, about college applications that had seemed impossible, about the future that had always felt like a door she couldn't quite reach. And now Robert, this man she'd met just a few weeks ago, was handing her the key. That evening, she went to room 412 earlier than usual. Robert was awake, waiting. You talked to William, he said. It wasn't a question. Robert, I don't know what to say. Don't say anything, he replied. Just accept it, please let me do this. Let me know that my life at the end meant something good. Rebecca sat beside his bed and took his fragile hand. Your life already means something good. You changed mine. Then let me change Lily's too, Robert said. Let me be the grandfather she never had, even if I never get to meet her. Let my last act be helping someone with their first act. Their college years, their future, their dreams. Rebecca couldn't speak. She just nodded and held his hand while the city lights flickered outside the window. Each one a story, each one a life, each one connected in ways you couldn't see until you looked closely enough, just like the gears in a watch. Robert's condition deteriorated quickly after that conversation. Within 3 days, he stopped eating. Within 5, he could barely stay awake. The doctor said it was a matter of days now, maybe a week at most. His body was shutting down piece by piece like a watch running out of wind. Rebecca took time off work using vacation days she'd been saving. Her supervisor didn't ask questions. Some things were more important than schedules and protocol. Rebecca spent almost every waking hour in room 412, reading to Robert when he was unconscious, talking to him about Lily and her day when he could listen, just sitting in silence when words felt like too much. Other nurses would peek in, offering support, bringing coffee. Rebecca had become a familiar fixture in that chair by the window. Even the cleaning staff moved quietly around her, understanding that what was happening in room 412 wasn't just death. It was something more complicated. Something about connection and meaning and the way lives intersect in unexpected ways. On a gray Thursday afternoon, Robert woke up more alert than he'd been in days. Rebecca was reading aloud from a book about watchmaking she'd found in the hospital library, when his hand moved slightly. She stopped mid-sentence. "That's a terrible book," Robert whispered, his voice hoarse. "Gets the spring mechanism all wrong." Rebecca laughed, relief flooding through her. "You scared me. I thought you were gone." "Not yet," Robert said. "Still got some time left. Not much, but enough." He motioned for water, and Rebecca helped him take small sips. His hands were too weak to hold the cup himself now. Everything that made Robert who he was seemed to be concentrated in his eyes. They were still sharp, still present, even as his body failed him. "I need to tell you about the watches," he said after a moment. "The collection William mentioned. There are 17 of them in a safe deposit box at First National Bank. The key is in my apartment, top drawer of my dresser." "Robert, you don't need to—" "Please," he interrupted gently. "Let me tell you. I don't have much energy, and this matters to me." Rebecca nodded, taking his hand. "Most of them are worth money, yes, but one of them, a silver pocket watch with an engraving on the back, that one I want you to keep. For Lily. Not for you. For her." "Why that one specifically?" Rebecca asked. Robert smiled, his eyes distant with memory. "It was my father's. He gave it to me when I turned 18. Told me that time is the only thing we can't make more of, so spend it wisely. I didn't listen. Spent my whole life working, building, achieving. Never spent time on people. On relationships. On love." He paused, breathing heavily from the effort of speaking. "I want Lily to have it." He continued. "Want her to learn what I didn't? That time with people you love is the only time that actually matters. The rest is just ticking." Rebecca wiped her eyes. "I'll tell her. I promise. I'll tell her about you, about this, about everything. Tell her about the gears too," Robert said, almost smiling. "Tell her that we're all little gears in some bigger machine we can't see. That every small action matters. That kindness ripples out in ways we never know." They sat quietly for a while. Outside, the November sky was heavy with clouds that threatened snow. The city below looked gray and tired, lights flickering on early as darkness came. "Rebecca," Robert said eventually. "I'm here. I'm scared." It was the first time he'd admitted it. The first time his voice cracked with something other than physical weakness. Rebecca squeezed his hand tighter. "I know," she said softly. "I would be too." "Not of dying exactly," Robert clarified. "More of not mattering. Of disappearing and leaving nothing behind but stuff, things, objects." "You're leaving more than that," Rebecca said firmly. "You're changing Lily's life. You're changing mine. That matters, Robert. That matters so much. You really think so?" "I know so." Robert's eyes got watery. "I wasted so much time. If I could do it over—" "You can't," Rebecca interrupted gently. "None of us can. But you can choose what your ending means. And you've chosen to make it mean something beautiful. That takes the waste and turns it into wisdom. That's not nothing, Robert. That's everything." He nodded slowly, seeming to draw comfort from her words. They talked for another hour, though talked was generous. Mostly Robert listened while Rebecca told him stories about Lily. about the way she laughed at terrible jokes, about how she wanted to be a veterinarian or an astronaut or both, about her kindness to the elderly dog they'd adopted from the shelter. "She sounds like you," Robert whispered. "God, I hope so," Rebecca said. As evening came and Robert's medication made him drowsy, he had one last thing to say. "Thank you, Rebecca, for everything, for seeing me, for sitting with me, for letting me matter." "Thank you for mattering," Rebecca replied. "Thank you for showing me that small acts of kindness are actually big acts. That sitting down when you could walk away can change everything." Robert fell asleep then, his breathing shallow but steady. Rebecca stayed until midnight, when the night shift nurse gently suggested she go home and rest. Lily would be worried. Life continued even when death was waiting in room 412. The next 2 days blurred together. Robert drifted in and out of consciousness. Sometimes he'd wake and seem to recognize Rebecca. Sometimes he'd stare right through her, talking to people from his past. His mother. His lost love, Helen. People Rebecca would never know. On Saturday morning, Rebecca got the call she'd been dreading. "You should come in," the charge nurse said. "It's time." Rebecca drove to the hospital with tears already streaming down her face. She found room 412 quiet, peaceful. Robert's breathing was irregular, labored. The monitors beeped softly. A doctor stood in the corner, respectful and distant. Rebecca took Robert's hand. It was cold now, barely there. She leaned close and whispered, "It's okay. You can go. You don't have to be scared. You mattered, Robert. You mattered so much." She told herself later that she imagined it, but she swore his fingers squeezed hers just slightly. One last communication. One last connection. Robert Chen died at 9:47 a.m. on a Saturday in November, with Rebecca holding his hand and the city lights visible through the window, each one representing a life, a story, a collection of moments that added up to something meaningful. The monitors flatlined. The doctor came forward. Everything became official and procedural. But Rebecca stayed, holding the hand of the man who'd been a stranger 6 weeks ago and had become something she couldn't quite name. Friend felt too small. Patient felt too clinical. Maybe he was just Robert, and that was enough. Maybe mattering doesn't need a label. Maybe it just needs someone to witness it. The funeral was small. Rebecca had expected that, but it still hurt her heart to see only 6 people in the chapel. Herself, William Patterson, 3 nurses from the hospital who'd gotten to know Robert in his final weeks, and 1 elderly man who'd worked with Robert 40 years ago and heard somehow about his passing. 6 people to mark the end of 78 years. Rebecca gave a short eulogy, though she'd never done one before and had no idea if she was doing it right. She talked about gears and watches and how every small piece mattered. She talked about loneliness and connection and how Robert had taught her to see people, really see them. She cried through most of it, but nobody seemed to mind. The elderly man, whose name was George, came up to her afterward. "He was a good man," George said. Kept to himself, but good. "I'm glad he had you at the end. Glad he wasn't alone." "He gave me more than I gave him," Rebecca replied, and she meant it. 2 weeks after the funeral, Rebecca sat at her kitchen table with Lily, trying to figure out how to explain everything. The inheritance was being processed. William had assured her it would take a few months, but everything was in order. The apartment would be sold. The investments would be liquidated. The trust fund for Lily's education would be established. But first, Rebecca needed to tell her daughter about the man who'd changed their lives. "His name was Robert," Rebecca began. "And he was one of my patients, but he became my friend." Lily listened quietly, the way kids do when they sense something important is happening. Rebecca told her about the evening visits, the conversations, the wisdom Robert had shared. She tried to explain loneliness in a way a 10-year-old could understand. She talked about kindness and connection and how small acts could ripple out into big changes. "He left us money?" Lily asked, trying to process it all. "He left you money?" Rebecca corrected. "For college. So you can become whatever you want to be. Veterinarian, astronaut, both. Whatever you dream, you can do it now without worrying about how to pay for it." "But why?" Lily asked. "He didn't even know me." "Because I told him about you," Rebecca said. "And because he wanted his life to mean something. He wanted his last act to be helping someone with their first act. He wanted to be the grandfather you never had." Lily was quiet for a long moment. Then she said something that made Rebecca's breath catch. "Was he sad? Because he was alone?" "I think he was," Rebecca admitted. but I also think he found peace at the end. And he knew that something good would come from his life. You, your future, your dreams. I wish I could have met him, Lily said softly. Me too, honey, me too. The next day, Rebecca went to Robert's apartment with William to collect some final items before it went on the market. The place was exactly what she'd expected. Small, neat, filled with clocks. Dozens of them on every wall, each one ticking at a slightly different rhythm. The sound was almost overwhelming, like time itself had a voice and was speaking in overlapping whispers. He really loved his work, William observed, looking around. He did, Rebecca agreed. Maybe too much. That's what he told me anyway. In the bedroom dresser, she found the key to the safe deposit box. She also found photographs. Robert with his sister, both of them young and smiling. Robert in his shop, surrounded by watches and tools, looking focused and content. Robert with a woman who must have been Helen, the one who got away, both of them so young it hurt to look at. A life in photographs. Moments frozen in time, preserved like insects in amber. At the bank, William helped her access the safe deposit box. Inside were 17 watches, each in its own velvet case. Beautiful, intricate, valuable. Pieces of art that measured something you couldn't hold. The silver pocket watch was exactly where Robert said it would be. Rebecca opened the case carefully. The watch gleamed, its face showing all the tiny gears and springs through a transparent backing. On the back was an engraving. Time spent with those we love is the only time that matters. Dad Rebecca's vision blurred with tears. This was what Robert had carried his whole life. This reminder he'd failed to follow. This wisdom he'd learned too late. And now he was passing it on, hoping Lily would do better. Be better. Choose better. That evening, Rebecca gave the watch to Lily. They sat on the couch, the old dog's head in Lily's lap, and Rebecca explained what the engraving meant. She told Lily about Robert's regrets, his missed chances, his life of work at the expense of people. I don't want you to make his mistakes, Rebecca said, and he didn't want you to either. That's why he wanted you to have this, to remember that time is precious, that people matter more than achievements, that love is the only thing that actually counts. Lily held the watch carefully, studying the exposed gears. Mom, look. You can see how everything works together. All the little pieces. Rebecca smiled through her tears, hearing Robert's voice in her memory. Every gear matters. Every piece has a purpose, yeah, baby. That's exactly right. Over the next few months, life settled into a new normal. The trust fund was established. Rebecca paid off her car and some medical bills, finally breathing without that constant weight of financial stress. She started leaving work on time, spending evenings with Lily instead of picking up extra shifts. She'd learned from Robert. She was choosing differently. Lily kept the watch on her bedside table. Sometimes Rebecca would catch her just staring at it, watching the gears turn. Once Lily asked, "Do you think Robert knew that he'd change our lives?" "I think he hoped," Rebecca answered. "I think he spent his whole life feeling like he didn't matter. And then at the very end, he found a way to matter enormously. That was his gift, not the money, the mattering." On the anniversary of Robert's death, Rebecca and Lily went to his grave. It was a simple stone, nothing fancy. Rebecca had paid for it with some of the inheritance money, feeling like it was the right thing to do. The right way to say thank you. They placed flowers and stood quietly for a moment. Then Lily said, "Thank you, Robert. I'm going to make you proud. I'm going to remember what you taught Mom and what Mom taught me. Time with people I love is the only time that matters." Rebecca hugged her daughter close, watching the November sky and thinking about gears and kindness and the way lives intersect in ways you never expect. 6 weeks of conversation had created a legacy. 6 weeks of seeing someone, really seeing them, had changed everything. Robert had spent 78 years learning a lesson, and his last act had been teaching it. And maybe that was enough. Maybe that was everything. Maybe mattering doesn't require a big life or a full funeral or hundreds of people who'll remember your name. Maybe it just requires one person whose life you changed. One person who'll tell your story. One person who'll look at a silver pocket watch and remember that time isn't measured in hours or minutes, but in the moments we spend showing up for each other, in being human, in being kind, in being present. In the end, that's all any of us can do. And sometimes, if we're lucky like Robert, it's enough to echo forward into futures we'll never see, changing lives we'll never meet, mattering long after the last gear stops turning. 5 years passed like pages turning in a book. Lily was 15 now, starting to think about colleges in that distant but approaching way teenagers do. The silver pocket watch still sat on her nightstand, and she still checked it sometimes, watching the gears turn in their endless, purposeful dance. Rebecca had changed too. She was still a hospice nurse, still working at St. Mary's, but she approached her job differently now. She sat down more, listened more, saw her patients as people first, diagnoses second, the other nurses noticed. New staff would ask her advice about connecting with difficult patients, and she'd tell them about Robert, about room 412, about how sometimes kindness is just choosing to stay when you could walk away. But it was Lily who carried Robert's legacy in ways Rebecca never expected. It started small. Lily volunteered at a nursing home when she turned 14, spending Saturday afternoons reading to elderly residents. She'd come home with stories about the people she met, about Dorothy, who'd been a jazz singer in the 1950s, about Mr. Franklin who'd served in Korea and still had nightmares, about quiet, forgotten people who lit up when someone actually listened. They're like Robert, aren't they? Lily asked one evening at dinner. Lonely, waiting for someone to see them. Yeah, Rebecca said softly. They're exactly like Robert. One Saturday in October, Lily came home from the nursing home unusually quiet. Rebecca was making dinner, chopping vegetables for soup, when she noticed her daughter sitting at the kitchen table with that look. The one that meant something important was percolating. There's this man, Lily finally said. His name is Arthur. He's 92. No family, no visitors. Just sits in his room all day looking out the window. Rebecca's heart clenched. She stopped chopping. That sounds familiar. He was a carpenter, Lily continued. Built houses his whole life. He showed me his hands today. They're all twisted from arthritis, but he talked about them like they were tools that failed him, like he lost his purpose when he couldn't work anymore. What did you say to him? Rebecca asked. I told him about Robert, Lily said. About the watchmaker who taught my mom that people matter more than work. About how Robert's last act was making sure I could go to college. About how one person's kindness can change everything. Rebecca sat down at the table, giving Lily her full attention. Arthur cried. Lily said quietly. He told me he thought nobody cared that he existed anymore. That he was just waiting to die. And I told him I cared. That I'd come every Saturday and we could talk about carpentry and houses and whatever he wanted. That he mattered to me. Rebecca reached across the table and squeezed her daughter's hand. Robert would be so proud of you. I hope so, Lily said. Because I've been thinking. The money he left for college, it's more than enough. Way more. And I was thinking maybe we could use some of it to help other people. People like Arthur. People like Robert was. What do you mean? Rebecca asked, though her heart was already soaring because she already knew where this was going. A foundation or something, Lily said, her words coming faster now, excited, for elderly people who don't have family, to make sure they have visitors, activities, connections. We could call it the Robert Chen Foundation, for people who need to be seen. Rebecca's eyes filled with tears. Lily, that's beautiful. But are you sure? That's your college money. I'll still have plenty for college, Lily said. More than most people ever get. And this feels right, Mom. It feels like what Robert would want. Not just helping me, but helping people like him, making sure his story keeps mattering. They talked late into the night, planning and dreaming. Rebecca called William Patterson the next week, and he helped them set up a small charitable foundation. They didn't have millions to work with, but they had enough to make a difference. Enough to fund visitor programs at nursing homes. Enough to connect isolated elderly people with volunteers. Enough to make sure fewer people ended up like Robert, alone and invisible. The first year they helped 37 people. The second year, 63. Word spread. Other volunteers joined. Local newspapers wrote articles about the teenage girl who'd started a foundation to combat elderly loneliness, inspired by a man she'd never met. Lily gave interviews, always carrying Robert's watch, always telling his story. She talked about gears and connection and how every person matters. She was poised and passionate. And Rebecca would watch her and think about the 10-year-old who'd received this gift, and the young woman she was becoming because of it. One evening, a woman named Patricia called the foundation. She was in her 70s and her voice shook when she spoke. I saw the article about your foundation, about Robert, and I need to tell you something. Rebecca took the call personally. Something in Patricia's voice made her pay attention. I knew Robert Chen, Patricia said. Not well, but I knew him. I worked at the bank where he kept his accounts. He'd come in every month, always polite, always alone. I tried to chat with him sometimes, ask about his day, but he seemed so closed off. I stopped trying after a while. Patricia paused, and Rebecca heard her crying softly. When I saw the article about what he did for you and your daughter, about the foundation you started in his name, I just broke down, Patricia continued, because I could have been kinder. I could have tried harder. I saw him once a month for 20 years, and I never really saw him at all. Not the way you did, Patricia, Rebecca said gently. You can't blame yourself. Robert kept people at a distance. It was his choice, his pattern. You couldn't have known, but I could have tried, Patricia insisted. And now I want to. I want to volunteer for your foundation. I want to be the person who sees people, who tries. I don't want anyone else to feel invisible the way Robert must have felt. Patricia became one of their most dedicated volunteers. She visited 3 different nursing homes every week, always stopping to talk to the people others walked past. She carried Robert's story with her like a torch, lighting up dark corners of loneliness wherever she went. Stories like that kept happening. Robert's legacy kept growing in ways Rebecca never imagined. A ripple effect that started with a cup of tea and a conversation in room 412. When Lily turned 16, she asked for something specific for her birthday. I want to visit Robert's grave, she said. Really visit it. Not just put flowers and leave. I want to tell him everything. About the foundation, about Arthur, about all the people we've helped because of him. So they went on a sunny Saturday in June. Rebecca brought tea in paper cups, a private joke that made her smile through tears. Lily brought a journal where she'd written down every person the foundation had helped, every story, every connection made. They sat on the grass beside Robert's headstone, and Lily read from the journal. Name after name, story after story. Lonely people who weren't lonely anymore. Invisible people who'd been seen. 143 people, Robert, Lily said finally. That's how many lives you've touched through us. And it's going to keep growing. You're going to keep mattering for decades, maybe generations, Rebecca added. You were wrong, you know, when you said you were scared of not mattering, of disappearing and leaving nothing behind. You left everything behind, Robert. You left love and kindness and purpose. You left a foundation that's changing the world, one lonely person at a time. They sat in silence for a while, listening to birds and distant traffic and the sound of the world continuing. The watch in Lily's pocket ticked steadily, marking time that mattered. Mom, Lily said eventually. Yeah, honey? Do you think Robert knew that this would happen, that his one act of kindness would become hundreds of acts of kindness? Rebecca thought about it, about Robert's final days, about the way he'd looked at her when she promised to tell Lily his story, about the hope in his eyes mixed with the fear. I think he hoped, Rebecca said. I think he died hoping that his life meant something. And we get to be the proof that it did. We get to be the answer to his fear. We get to say, yes, Robert, you mattered. You mattered so much that you're still changing lives 5 years later. You're still teaching people to see each other. You're still making gears turn in ways you never imagined. Lily nodded, pulling out the silver pocket watch. She opened it, showing her mother the exposed gears, the intricate mechanism that Robert's father had given him so long ago. Time spent with those we love is the only time that matters. We're spending time with him right now, Lily said, even though he's gone. Because love doesn't stop when people die. It just changes shape. When did you get so wise? Rebecca asked, hugging her daughter close. I learned from a watchmaker, Lily replied. And from a nurse who chose to sit down instead of walk away. And from everyone who's ever chosen connection over convenience. As they walked back to the car, Rebecca thought about all the empty rooms in all the hospitals and nursing homes. All the lonely people waiting for someone to see them. And she thought about how many of those rooms were a little less lonely now because of Robert, because of Lily, because of everyone who'd heard the story and decided to be part of the solution. One man's life, one nurse's kindness, one daughter's compassion. Together, they'd created something that would outlive them all. A foundation built not on money, but on the simple revolutionary idea that everyone deserves to be seen, to matter, to be remembered. And somewhere, Rebecca liked to imagine, Robert was watching his gears turn, finally understanding that a life spent connecting people was worth more than a life spent perfecting watches. That love compounds over time in ways craftsmanship never could. That his biggest fear had become his greatest triumph. He'd spent 78 years learning how to matter. And now, 5 years after his death, he was teaching hundreds of people the same lesson, not through words but through the ripple effect of one choice, the choice to give, the choice to love, the choice to believe that even at the end you can create a beginning for someone else. The gears kept turning. The story kept spreading. And Robert Chen, the lonely watchmaker from room 412, kept mattering more and more with each passing day.